Wedding Night Story. Part 1. Sarah had dreamed of this day since she was a little girl. The white dress, the flowers, the cake, and most importantly, marrying the man she loved more than anything in the world. Marcus had swept her off her feet 3 years ago at a coffee shop downtown. He was charming, successful, and treated her like a queen from the very first date. The wedding ceremony was perfect. Sarah's mother cried tears of joy as she walked down the aisle. Her father, usually a tough man who rarely showed emotion, had to wipe his eyes when he handed her over to Marcus. The church was filled with friends and family, all celebrating the union of two people who seemed destined to be together. Marcus looked handsome in his black tuxedo, his dark hair perfectly styled, and his smile bright as Sarah approached the altar. When the priest asked if he would take Sarah as his wife, Marcus's voice was strong and clear. "I do," he said, looking directly into her eyes. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. This was really happening. After all the planning, all the stress, all the dreams, she was finally becoming Mrs. Marcus Thompson. The reception was everything Sarah had imagined. The venue was decorated with white roses and fairy lights. The dinner was delicious and the band played all their favorite songs. Marcus gave a speech that made everyone laugh and cry at the same time. He talked about how lucky he felt to have found Sarah, how she made him a better man, and how he promised to love her for the rest of his life. Sarah's best friend Jenny gave a maid of honor speech that recalled all their childhood dreams about weddings and Prince Charming. "Sarah always knew she would find her perfect match," Jenny said, raising her glass. "And Marcus, you better take good care of our girl because she deserves nothing but the best." Everyone cheered and clapped. As the evening went on, Sarah noticed that Marcus seemed a bit nervous. He kept checking his phone, which was unusual for him. During their first dance to At Last by Etta James, she whispered in his ear, "Everything okay, honey?" He smiled and kissed her forehead. "Everything's perfect now that you're my wife," he replied. But Sarah could sense something was different about his energy. The party continued late into the night. Sarah's college friends were on the dance floor, her cousins were taking photos, and even her grandmother was having a wonderful time. Marcus was charming as always, talking to all the guests, making sure everyone was having fun, but Sarah caught him several times stepping outside to take phone calls. When she asked about it, he said it was just work stuff that couldn't wait. Around 11 o'clock, Marcus found Sarah talking to her college roommate and gently touched her arm. "Hey, beautiful, ready to head to our suite?" The hotel had prepared a special honeymoon suite for them, complete with champagne, rose petals, and chocolate-covered strawberries. Sarah had been looking forward to this moment all day. They said goodbye to their families and friends who threw rice and flower petals as they walked to the hotel elevator. Sarah's mother hugged her tight and whispered, "Be happy, sweetheart. You deserve all the love in the world." Her father shook Marcus's hand firmly and said, "Take care of my little girl." Marcus nodded seriously and promised he would. In the elevator, Sarah leaned against Marcus's shoulder, feeling tired but incredibly happy. "I can't believe we're actually married," she said softly. "I feel like I'm in a dream." Marcus wrapped his arm around her and kissed the top of her head. "It's not a dream, Mrs. Thompson. This is our real life now." Sarah loved hearing her new name. She had practiced writing it dozens of times in the months leading up to the wedding. When they reached their floor, Marcus carried Sarah over the threshold of their suite, just like in the movies. The room was beautiful, with candles flickering everywhere and soft music playing. Sarah kicked off her high heels, which had been hurting her feet for hours. "Oh my goodness, that feels so much better," she laughed. Marcus loosened his tie and sat down on the bed, looking at his phone again. Sarah went into the bathroom to change out of her wedding dress. It took her several minutes because of all the buttons and the layers of fabric. She had bought a special white nightgown for this night, something elegant and romantic. As she looked at herself in the mirror, she thought about how this was the beginning of their life together as husband and wife. When she came out of the bathroom, she expected to find Marcus waiting for her, maybe with a glass of champagne. Instead, he was pacing by the window, talking on his phone in a quiet but intense voice. He seemed to be having some kind of argument with someone. Sarah couldn't make out the words, but his body language showed he was stressed or upset about something. She sat on the edge of the bed and waited for him to finish his call. This wasn't exactly how she had imagined their wedding night would begin. She had pictured them talking about the wonderful day, looking through the wedding photos on her phone, maybe sharing a romantic dinner from room service. Instead, Marcus seemed distracted and worried about something that had nothing to do with their special day. Finally, Marcus ended his call and turned around. When he saw Sarah sitting there in her beautiful nightgown, his expression changed completely. The stress disappeared from his face, and he smiled the same loving smile that had made her fall in love with him 3 years ago. "I'm sorry about that," he said, walking over to her. "You look absolutely beautiful." He sat down next to her and took her hands in his. "Sarah, there's something I need to tell you. Something that's going to change everything about our life together." His voice was serious, almost nervous. Sarah felt her stomach tighten with worry. What could he possibly need to tell her now? On their wedding night, that was so important it couldn't wait until tomorrow. They had been together for 3 years. They had talked about everything, their pasts, their dreams, their fears, their plans for the future. What secret could Marcus have been keeping from her all this time? Wedding night story. Part 2. Sarah's heart began to race as she looked into Marcus's eyes. The soft candlelight in their honeymoon suite suddenly felt different, less romantic and more uncertain. "What do you mean?" she asked quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. "What's going to change everything?" Marcus stood up and walked back to the window, running his hands through his hair. This was a nervous habit she had noticed during their relationship, but usually only when he was dealing with work stress or family problems. "Remember how I told you about my job at the consulting firm? How I travel for business meetings and client presentations?" Sarah nodded, feeling confused. Of course she remembered. Marcus worked for a successful business consulting company. He made good money, which was how they could afford their nice apartment and their dream wedding. Sometimes he had to travel for work, which she understood. That was normal for someone in his profession. "Well, that's not exactly the whole truth," Marcus continued, still looking out the window instead of at her. "I mean, I do work for a consulting company, and I do travel for business. But there's more to it than that. Much more." Sarah felt like the room was spinning slightly. This was their wedding night. They had just promised to love and honor each other in front of all their family and friends. Why was he telling her this now? Why hadn't he been completely honest with her before they got married? "Marcus, you're scaring me," she said, standing up and walking toward him. "Just tell me what's going on. Whatever it is, we can figure it out together. We're married now. We're a team." He turned around and looked at her with an expression she had never seen before. It was a mixture of love, fear, and something else she couldn't identify. "Sarah, I work for the government, not just any part of the government. I work for a special agency that handles international security situations. The consulting company is just a cover story." Sarah stared at him in complete silence for several seconds. This felt like something out of a movie, not her real life. "What do you mean, a special agency?" she asked slowly. Like the CIA or something?" Marcus nodded slowly. "Something like that. Yes, I can't give you all the details because of security reasons, but I needed to tell you the truth now that we're married. Those phone calls I've been getting tonight? There's a situation developing that requires my immediate attention. I have to leave." "Leave?" Sarah's voice came out higher than she intended. "Leave where? When?" "It's our wedding night, Marcus. We just got married 6 hours ago. Can't someone else handle whatever this situation is?" Marcus walked over to her and gently placed his hands on her shoulders. "I know the timing is terrible. I know this isn't what you expected for our wedding night. But this is what I do, Sarah. This is who I am. And now that you're my wife, you need to know the truth about my life." Sarah sat back down on the bed, trying to process what she was hearing. Her new husband wasn't really a business consultant. He was some kind of secret agent or government operative. All those business trips, all those late-night phone calls, all those times he couldn't tell her exactly where he was going or what meetings he was attending. It all made sense now. How long have you been doing this kind of work? She asked, looking up at him. About 5 years, he replied. I started right after college. I was recruited because of my language skills and my ability to blend in with different cultures. The consulting job was the perfect cover because it explained why I traveled so much and why I sometimes couldn't talk about my work in detail. Sarah felt tears starting to form in her eyes. So you've been lying to me for 3 years? Our entire relationship has been based on a lie? Marcus sat down beside her and took her hands again. No, Sarah. Everything about my feelings for you, everything. About our relationship, everything about my love for you. That's all completely real and true. The only thing I kept secret was my job. I wanted to tell you so many times, but I couldn't risk putting you in danger. Danger? Sarah pulled her hands away from his. What kind of danger? What exactly do you do for this agency? Marcus was quiet, for a moment choosing his words carefully. I gather information. I monitor situations that could threaten national security. Sometimes I have to travel to places where there might be some risk involved. That's why I couldn't tell you. The less you knew, the safer you were. The phone on the nightstand rang, making them both jump. Marcus looked at Sarah apologetically before answering it. Thompson here, he said in a voice that sounded more professional and serious than Sarah had ever heard from him before. She couldn't hear what the person on the other end was saying, but she could see from Marcus's face that it was serious. How long do we have? He asked. Then, understood. I'll be there in 2 hours. He hung up the phone and looked at Sarah with genuine sadness in his eyes. I have to go, he said quietly. There's a flight leaving in 3 hours, and I need to be on it. Sarah stood up quickly, anger starting to mix with her shock and hurt. Absolutely not. I don't care what kind of work you do or how important you think this situation is. We just got married today. Our family spent months planning this wedding. I've been dreaming about our wedding night since we got engaged. You are not leaving me alone in this hotel room to go off on some secret mission. Marcus walked over to the closet and pulled out a black suitcase that Sarah had never seen before. It looked different from his regular luggage, more sturdy and professional. Sarah, I don't have a choice. When they call, I have to respond. People's lives could be at stake. What about my life? Sarah asked, her voice breaking slightly. What about our life together? Doesn't that matter at all? Marcus stopped packing and walked back to her. He cupped her face in his hands and looked directly into her eyes. You matter more to me than anything else in the world. That's why I'm telling you the truth now. That's why I married you today, even though I knew this day might come. I love you, Sarah Thompson, and I need you to trust me. Sarah looked at her new husband, really looked at him, and realized she was seeing him clearly for the first time. The man she had fallen in love with was still there, but there was also this other side of him that she had never known existed. He was stronger, more serious, more complicated than she had ever imagined. If you leave tonight, she said slowly, our marriage might never recover from this. You understand that, right? Marcus nodded sadly. I understand. But if I don't leave tonight, other people might not get the chance to have what we have. That's the choice I have to live with every day. Wedding Night Story, Part 3. Sarah watched in stunned silence as Marcus quickly packed clothes she had never seen him wear before. Black tactical pants, plain t-shirts in dark colors, and boots that looked nothing like his usual business shoes. It was like watching a stranger inhabit her husband's body. Everything about the way he moved was different now, more focused, more efficient, more professional. How long will you be gone? She asked, sitting back down on the bed. Her beautiful wedding dress was hanging in the closet, and her new nightgown suddenly felt silly and inappropriate for this conversation. Marcus paused in his packing. I honestly don't know. It could be a few days, it could be a few weeks. These situations are unpredictable. I never know until I'm in the middle of them. A few weeks? Sarah's voice cracked. Marcus, we're supposed to leave for our honeymoon in Hawaii tomorrow morning. We have reservations at that resort we've been planning to visit for months. What am I supposed to tell my family? What am I supposed to tell your parents? Tell them there was a work emergency, Marcus said, zipping up his suitcase. Tell them I had to handle a crisis with an important client. It's not technically a lie. Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights below. Just a few hours ago, she had been the happiest woman in the world. Now she felt like her entire life had been turned upside down. I don't understand how you could keep this from me for so long. We talked about having children someday. We talked about buying a house. We made plans for our future. How are you going to keep this secret forever? Marcus set his suitcase by the door and walked over to her. I wasn't planning to keep it secret forever. I was hoping that eventually I could transfer to a desk job, something with less travel and less risk. I thought maybe in a few years, when we started thinking seriously about starting a family, I could make that transition, but you didn't tell me that, Sarah said, turning to face him. You didn't give me the choice to decide if I wanted to marry someone with this kind of job. You made that decision for me. Marcus looked down at his hands. You're right. I was selfish. I was afraid that if you knew the truth, you might not want to be with me. I couldn't bear the thought of losing you. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face now. So instead, you waited until our wedding night to tell me that my husband is some kind of spy who might disappear at any moment without warning? How is that better? Before Marcus could answer, there was a knock at the door. They looked at each other in surprise. Room service? Sarah suggested, but she knew they hadn't ordered anything. Marcus looked through the peephole and then opened the door. Two men in dark suits stood in the hallway. They looked exactly like what Sarah imagined government agents would look like. Serious faces, earpieces, and an air of authority that made her feel immediately uncomfortable. Thompson, we need to move, one of them said without any greeting or introduction. The situation has escalated. Transport is waiting downstairs. Marcus nodded and grabbed his suitcase. Give me 2 minutes, he said to the men, then closed the door and turned back to Sarah. I have to go now, he said, walking quickly toward her. Sarah, I know this is a lot to process, and I know the timing is terrible, but I need you to understand that everything I told you about loving you is true. Everything about wanting to build a life with you is true. Sarah backed away from him. How can I believe anything you say now? How do I know what's true and what's just part of your cover story? Marcus stopped walking toward her and stood still, in the middle of the room. Because of this, he said, pulling something out of his pocket. It was a small wooden box, old and worn, completely different from the velvet ring box he had used to propose to her months ago. He opened the box, and inside was a simple gold ring, much plainer than her engagement ring, but somehow more meaningful. This was my grandfather's wedding ring. He wore it for 53 years until the day he died. My grandmother gave it to me before she passed away and made me promise to only give it to a woman I planned to love for the rest of my life. He took the ring out of the box and held it out to her. I was going to give this to you tonight after we had time to celebrate being married. I wanted you to have something that represented the real me, not the consultant version or the agent version, but the man who loves you more than his own life. Sarah looked at the simple gold ring and felt her heart breaking. It was beautiful in its simplicity, and she could see tiny scratches and worn spots that told the story of a long, loving marriage. This wasn't something Marcus could have prepared as part of some elaborate cover story. This was real. Another knock at the door, more insistent this time. Thompson, we're out of time, one of the voices called through the door. Marcus looked at Sarah with desperate eyes. I have to go, but I'm coming back to you, I promise. And when I do, we'll figure out how to make this work. We'll figure out how to build a life together that includes the truth about who I am. Sarah took the ring from him and held it in her palm. It was warm from being in his pocket and heavier than she expected. What if you don't come back? She asked quietly. What if something happens to you and I never see you again? What if our last conversation as husband and wife is this fight on our wedding night? Marcus stepped forward and gently cupped her face in his hands. Then I want you to know that marrying you today was the best thing I've ever done in my life, and I want you to know that every morning I wake up thinking about coming home to you. And every night I go to sleep grateful that somehow I was lucky enough to find someone who loves me despite all my flaws. He kissed her softly, and for just a moment Sarah forgot about the men waiting in the hallway and the secret life she had just discovered. For just a moment, He was just Marcus, the man she had fallen in love with in a coffee shop 3 years ago. When he pulled away, he looked into her eyes one more time. "Put the ring somewhere safe. When I come back, we'll decide together if you still want to wear it." The knocking at the door became more urgent. Marcus grabbed his suitcase and walked toward the door, then stopped and looked back at her. "Sarah, I love you. Remember that no matter what happens next." And then he was gone, leaving Sarah alone in their honeymoon suite, still wearing her wedding nightgown, holding his grandfather's ring, and trying to understand how her perfect wedding day had ended with her husband disappearing into the night on what might be a dangerous mission to save other people's lives. Wedding Night Story. Part 4. Sarah stood in the empty hotel suite for a long time after Marcus left, still holding his grandfather's ring. The candles were still flickering, the champagne was still chilled, and the rose petals were still scattered across the bed, but everything felt completely different now. She walked to the window and looked down at the street, hoping to catch a glimpse of Marcus getting into a car, but the street was empty. She sat down on the bed and finally allowed herself to cry. Not the happy tears she had shed during the wedding ceremony, but tears of confusion, hurt, and fear. Her phone started buzzing with text messages from friends and family members who were still celebrating at the hotel bar downstairs. "Having the best time," wrote her cousin Lisa. "You two are so perfect together," texted her college friend Amy. If only they knew, Sarah thought bitterly. If only any of them knew that the groom had just disappeared on a secret government mission, leaving his bride alone on their wedding night. Around 2 in the morning, Sarah finally changed out of her nightgown and put on regular clothes. She couldn't bear to stay in the honeymoon suite any longer. Everything about it reminded her of the life she thought she was starting with Marcus, not the complicated reality she had discovered. She went down to the hotel lobby and asked if she could get a different room, something simple and small. The night manager looked confused but didn't ask questions. Within an hour, Sarah was settled in a basic room on the 3rd floor, far away from the romantic suite that now felt like a crime scene. The next morning, Sarah had to face the most difficult part of this whole situation, explaining to everyone why she and Marcus weren't on their way to Hawaii for their honeymoon. Her phone had been ringing since 7 a.m. with calls from both sets of parents, her maid of honor Jenny, and even the travel agent who had booked their trip. She decided to call her mother first. "Hi, Mom," she said, trying to sound normal. "Good. Morning, sweetheart. How was your first night as a married woman? Are you and Marcus getting ready to head to the airport?" Her mother sounded so happy and excited that Sarah almost started crying again. "Actually, Mom, there's been a change of plans. Marcus had to leave for a work emergency last night, a big client crisis that he had to handle personally. We're going to have to postpone the honeymoon." There was a long pause on the other end of the phone. "He left last night? On your wedding night? What kind of work emergency could possibly be that important?" Sarah had rehearsed this conversation in her head, but it was still difficult to lie to her mother. "You know how his consulting work is, Mom. When big clients have problems, they expect immediate attention. He didn't have a choice." "Sarah, honey, are you okay? You sound upset." "I'm fine, Mom. Just disappointed about Hawaii. We'll reschedule when he gets back." "When will he be back?" Sarah stared at the hotel room wall, remembering Marcus's words from the night before. "I don't know exactly. It could be a few days or a few weeks, depending on how complicated the situation is." After she hung up with her mother, Sarah had to make similar calls to Marcus's parents, to Jenny, and to several other people who were expecting updates on their honeymoon plans. Each conversation became a little easier, but also made her feel more and more like she was living a double life, just like Marcus had been doing. By noon, Sarah realized she couldn't stay in the hotel any longer. She checked out and went back to their apartment, which now felt strange and unfamiliar. All of Marcus's regular clothes were still in the closet, but she kept thinking about that black suitcase and those tactical clothes she had never seen before. How many other secrets were hidden in their home? She spent the afternoon going through Marcus's belongings with new eyes. His home office, which had always been off limits because of confidential client information, now seemed suspicious. His Filing cabinet was locked and she had never questioned that before. His computer required passwords she didn't know, which she had accepted as normal for someone who handled sensitive business information. Sarah found herself looking at their photos together. Pictures from vacations, dinner dates, family gatherings, and wondering what Marcus had really been thinking in each moment. When they went to her cousin's wedding in California, had he been on a mission? When he surprised her with a weekend trip to Boston, was that really a romantic gesture or was he combining business with pleasure? That evening, Jenny came over with takeout Chinese food and a bottle of wine. "Okay, spill," she said as soon as she walked through the door. "What's really going on? I know Marcus and I know he would never leave you alone on your wedding night unless something major was happening." Sarah had been dreading this conversation. Jenny had been her best friend since high school. They told each other everything, but now Sarah had a secret that she couldn't share with anyone, not even Jenny. "It really was just a work thing," Sarah said, trying to sound convincing. "You know how demanding his job can be." Jenny set down her wine glass and looked directly at Sarah. "Sarah Elizabeth Thompson, I have known you for 15 years. I can tell when you're lying. What happened last night?" Sarah felt the weight of her new reality settling on her shoulders. She couldn't tell Jenny the truth about Marcus's real job, because that would put both of them in danger. She couldn't tell her parents because they would worry constantly. She couldn't tell anyone the real reason why her husband had disappeared on their wedding night. "I can't talk about it," Sarah finally said quietly. "I wish I could, but I can't. You're going to have to trust me on this." Jenny reached across the couch and took Sarah's hand. "Are you safe? Are you in any kind of danger?" Sarah thought about that question seriously. Marcus had said that keeping his job secret had been partly about protecting her, but now that she knew the truth, was she safer or in more danger? "I think I'm safe," she said, "but everything is just complicated right now." "Does this have anything to do with why Marcus was acting strange at the reception?" "I saw him taking a lot of phone calls and stepping outside. At the time I thought, maybe he was just nervous about the wedding night, but now I'm wondering if something else was going on." Sarah nodded but didn't elaborate. Jenny squeezed her hand tighter. "Whatever is happening, you don't have to go through it alone. I'm here for you, even if you can't tell me all the details." That night, after Jenny left, Sarah sat in her bedroom holding Marcus's grandfather's ring. She had put it on a chain and was wearing it as a necklace close to her heart but not on her finger. She wasn't ready to wear it as a wedding ring yet, but she wasn't ready to put it away either. She thought about all the conversations she and Marcus had had about their future together. They had talked about wanting 3 children, about buying a house with a big backyard, about growing old together. None of those conversations had included the possibility that Marcus might disappear for weeks at a time on dangerous missions, or that Sarah would have to lie to everyone she cared about to protect his cover. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Sarah realized that her marriage had begun with the biggest challenge most couples never have to face: learning to love someone, while accepting that you might never fully know them, and learning to build a life together while keeping the most important parts of that life secret from everyone else in the world. Wedding Night Story. Part 5. 3 weeks passed with no word from Marcus. Sarah had settled into a strange new routine of pretending everything was normal, while her world felt completely upside down. She went to work at the marketing firm where she had been employed for 2 years, attended her usual yoga classes, and met friends for dinner, all while carrying the weight of Marcus's secret and her own growing anxiety about his safety. The hardest part was the constant questions from well-meaning friends and family members. "How's married life?" they would ask with bright smiles. "When is Marcus coming back from his business trip?" Sarah became an expert at changing the subject or giving vague answers that didn't really satisfy anyone, but kept them from digging deeper. Her mother called every few days, clearly worried, but trying not to interfere. "Honey, it's been 3 weeks, she said during one particularly difficult phone conversation. "What kind of business emergency takes 3 weeks to resolve?" "It's complicated, Mom," Sarah replied, staring out the window of their apartment. "These big international deals take time to negotiate." "Have you at least been able to talk to him? Has he called you?" This was the question Sarah dreaded most because the answer was no. She had heard nothing from Marcus since he walked out of their honeymoon suite. No phone calls, no text messages, no emails. It was as if he had vanished completely from her life. "He's been really busy," she lied. "The time differences make it hard to connect." After she hung up with her mother, Sarah sat in Marcus's home office and stared at his locked filing cabinet. She had been tempted dozens of times to try to break it open or find the key, but something held her back. Maybe it was respect for his privacy, or maybe it was fear of what she might find. On Thursday evening of the third week, Sarah was making dinner for one when there was a knock at the door. Her heart jumped, hoping it might be Marcus, but when she looked through the peephole, she saw a woman she didn't recognize. The woman was about 40 years old, professionally dressed with short brown hair and an air of authority that reminded Sarah of the men who had come to collect Marcus from the hotel. Sarah opened the door cautiously, leaving the chain lock engaged. "Can I help you?" "Mrs. Thompson, my name is Agent Rivera. I work with your husband. May I come in? I have some information about Marcus that I think you'd like to hear." Sarah's heart started racing. This was the first contact she'd had with anyone from Marcus's real world since he left. She unlatched the chain and opened the door wider. "Is he okay? Is he safe?" Agent Rivera stepped into the apartment and looked around briefly before focusing on Sarah. "He's safe, as far as we know. But the situation he's dealing with has become more complicated than we initially expected. I wanted to come talk to you personally because I know this has been a difficult time for you." Sarah led Agent Rivera to the living room, grateful to finally have someone she could talk to honestly. "Nobody told me it would be like this when I married him. Nobody told me there would be weeks with no communication, no way to know if he's alive or dead. I know this is hard," Agent Rivera said, sitting down across from Sarah. "Marcus specifically asked me to check on you if the mission ran longer than 2 weeks. He's worried about how you're handling all of this." "He asked you to check on me?" Sarah felt a mix of relief and frustration. "So he is able to communicate with you, just not with me?" Agent Rivera chose her words carefully. The nature of his current assignment requires complete radio silence with anyone who isn't directly involved in the operation. That includes family members. It's for everyone's safety, including yours. Sarah felt tears starting to form. "How long is this going to continue? How long before I can talk to my husband again?" "I honestly don't know," Agent Rivera replied. "But I can tell you that Marcus is one of our best operatives. He's smart, he's careful, and he has excellent instincts. The fact that he's been doing this work for 5 years without any serious incidents should give you some confidence." "5 years," Sarah repeated bitterly. "5 years of lying to me about what he really does for a living. How am I supposed to trust him when this is all over?" Agent Rivera leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Thompson, can I tell you something about your husband that might help you understand his perspective?" Sarah nodded, eager to hear anything that might make sense of her situation. 3 years ago, before Marcus met you, he was considering leaving the agency. The work was taking a toll on him, and he was tired of the constant travel and the inability to form close relationships. But then he met you, and everything changed for him. He started talking about having something worth coming home to. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Then why didn't he just quit? Why did he keep doing this dangerous work if he wanted a normal life with me?" "Because he's good at what he does, and the work he does saves lives. The mission he's on right now, if he and his team succeed, they'll prevent a terrorist attack that could kill hundreds of innocent people. Marcus knows that, and he also knows that very few people have the skills necessary to handle these kinds of situations." Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the street where normal people were walking home from work, going to dinner, living ordinary lives that didn't involve wondering if their spouses were alive or dead. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this kind of life," she said quietly. "Marcus was afraid you might feel that way," Agent Rivera said. "That's why he waited so long to tell you the truth. He was hoping he could transition to a desk job before you had to know about any of this." "But that's not what happened," Sarah said, turning back to face Agent Rivera. "Instead, he told me on our wedding night and then disappeared for 3 weeks. Agent Rivera stood up and reached into her briefcase, pulling out a sealed envelope. Marcus asked me to give you this if the mission extended beyond 3 weeks. He wrote it before he left, but he wanted you to have time to process everything before you read it. Sarah took the envelope with shaking hands. Her name was written on the front in Marcus's familiar handwriting. Can I read it now? Or should I wait until you leave? That's entirely up to you. But I will say this, Marcus loves you more than anything in this world. Everything he's doing right now, all the risks he's taking, he's doing it because he believes in protecting the life you two are trying to build together. After Agent Rivera left, Sarah sat on the couch holding the envelope for almost an hour before she found the courage to open it. Inside was a 3-page letter written in Marcus's careful handwriting. My dearest Sarah, it began. If you're reading this, it means I've been gone longer than I promised, and I know you must be scared and angry and confused. I don't blame you for any of those feelings. I blame myself for putting you in this impossible situation. Sarah read on, learning things about Marcus she had never known. He wrote about growing up with parents who worked for the State Department, about how he had always felt called to serve his country, about the guilt he carried for keeping secrets from the person he loved most. I know you're wondering if our whole relationship was built on lies, he wrote, but I need you to know that every moment of happiness we've shared has been completely real. Every time I told you I loved you, every plan we made for our future, every laugh we shared, none of that was pretending. The only thing I kept hidden was my job, and I kept it hidden because I was terrified of losing you. The letter went on to explain more about his work, as much as security would allow. He told her about the training he had received, about some of the places he had traveled, about the kinds of situations his team was called in to handle. He also wrote about his hopes for their future together. I know this isn't the life you thought you were signing up for when you said yes to my proposal, he continued. I know it's not fair to ask you to love someone who might disappear without warning, who can't always tell you where he's going or when he'll be back. But I'm asking anyway, because I can't imagine my life without you in it. The final page of the letter was the hardest to read. Marcus wrote about the possibility that he might not come back from missions, about the life insurance policies he had set up, about his wishes for Sarah's future if something happened to him. If you're reading this and I don't make it home, he wrote, I want you to know that loving you was the best thing I ever did with my life. I want you to be happy, to find love again, to have the children we talked about and the house with the big backyard. Don't spend your life waiting for someone who isn't coming back. But the letter ended on a more hopeful note. However, I fully intend to come home to you. I intend to spend the rest of my life making up for this terrible start to our marriage. I intend to find a way to balance my work with our life together, even if it means making some difficult career changes. You are my priority now, Sarah. You are my home. Sarah read the letter 3 times, crying harder each time. By the time she finished, she realized something important had shifted in her feelings about the situation. She was still hurt and scared, but she also felt something she hadn't expected. Pride. Pride in her husband for doing work that protected innocent people. Pride in herself for being strong enough to handle this impossible situation. And pride in their love for surviving this ultimate test. Wedding night story. Part 6. Marcus set down his coffee cup and looked at Sarah with uncertain eyes. I wasn't sure you'd still be here, he said quietly. I wasn't sure you'd want me to come home. Sarah reached up and touched his face, noticing a small scar near his left ear that hadn't been there on their wedding day. Where else would I be? This is our home. We're married. I know, but after everything that happened on our wedding night, after the way I left, Marcus's voice trailed off as he searched her face for signs of how she was feeling. We need to talk, Sarah said, taking his hand and leading him to the living room. We need to talk about everything. About your job, about our marriage, about how we're going to make this work. They sat down on the couch together, and Marcus noticed immediately that Sarah was wearing his grandfather's ring. You put it on, he said, touching her hand gently. I wasn't ready at first, Sarah admitted. I needed time to understand what it meant, what you were asking me to accept by giving it to me. But Agent Rivera came to see me a few days ago, and she helped me understand some things about your work and about you. Marcus looked surprised. Rivera came here? What did she tell you? She told me about the mission you're on, about how the work you do saves innocent lives. She also told me that you wanted to quit before you met me. But then you started talking about having something worth coming home to. Marcus nodded slowly. That's all true. Meeting you changed everything for me, Sarah. Before you, this job was just something I was good at. After you, it became something I had to balance with the most important thing in my life. Sarah pulled out the letter he had written and showed it to him. I read this about 50 times. It helped me understand why you kept your job secret, even though I still wish you had told me sooner. I should have told you before we got engaged, Marcus said, looking down at his hands. I should have given you the choice to decide if you wanted to marry someone with this kind of life. That was selfish of me. Yes, it was, Sarah agreed. But I also understand why you were afraid. This isn't exactly the kind of thing you bring up on a first date or even a 10th date. Marcus looked at her with surprise. You're not angry? Oh, I'm furious, Sarah said with a small smile. I'm angry that you lied to me for 3 years. I'm angry that you left me alone on our wedding night. I'm angry that I spent 3 weeks not knowing if you were alive or dead. But I'm also proud of you for doing work that matters, and I'm proud of myself for being strong enough to handle it. Marcus reached over and took her hands in his. Sarah, I need you to know that things are going to change. I've already talked to my supervisor about transitioning to a different role, something with less field work and more desk assignments. It might take a year or two, but I want to find a way to keep doing meaningful work while also being the husband you deserve. What if I don't want you to change jobs? Sarah asked, surprising him. What if I want you to keep doing the work you're good at, the work that makes a difference in the world? Marcus stared at her. Are you serious? After everything you've been through these past 3 weeks? Sarah stood up and walked to the window, thinking about everything she had learned about herself during Marcus's absence. I spent a lot of time thinking while you were gone. I realized that part of what I fell in love with was your sense of purpose, your commitment to something bigger than yourself. I don't want to be the reason you give up work that you believe in. But what about the uncertainty, the long separations, the fact that I can't always tell you where I'm going or when I'll be back? Sarah turned back to face him. Those things will be hard, but they're not impossible. Military families do. Diplomatic families do it. We can learn to do it too, as long as we're honest with each other from now on. Marcus stood up and walked over to her. What are you saying exactly? I'm saying that I want to make this marriage work, even if it's more complicated than either of us expected. I'm saying that I'd rather be married to someone who does dangerous, important work than be married to someone who gave up their calling because of me. Marcus pulled her into his arms and held her tightly. Are you sure? Because once we make this decision, there's no going back. There will be more missions, more separations, more nights when you go to bed not knowing where I am. Sarah pulled back slightly so she could look into his eyes. I'm sure, but I have conditions. Name them. First, no more lies. Ever. If you can't tell me something because of security reasons, you say that. You don't make up cover stories. Agreed. Second, we set up a communication system. I don't need to know operational details, but I need some way to know you're alive, even if it's just a one-word text every few days. I can probably arrange that through Rivera or someone else on the team. Third, we see a marriage counselor who specializes in families like ours. We're going to need help learning how to navigate this kind of relationship. Marcus nodded. That's actually a really good idea. What else? And fourth, Sarah said, smiling for the first time since he'd come home. When you are home, you're really home. No work calls during dinner, no checking emails during movies, no getting distracted by anything that isn't a genuine emergency. When you're with me, I need you to be completely present. That's more than fair, Marcus said, kissing her forehead. Anything else? Sarah thought for a moment. Actually, yes. I want to know more about what you do. Not classified details, but I want to understand your world better. I want to meet the people you work with, learn about the kind of training you've had, understand what drives you to do this work. I think I can arrange some of that, Marcus said. There are support groups for families of operatives. Rivera mentioned that when we talked about you. They spent the rest of the morning talking about practical things, how to handle questions from family and friends, how to manage their finances during long separations, how to maintain their relationship when they couldn't always communicate freely. It wasn't the romantic reunion Sarah had imagined during the 3 weeks Marcus was gone, but it was something better. It was real and honest and full of hope for their future. In the afternoon, they finally called their families to let everyone know that Marcus was back safely and that they were rescheduling their honeymoon for the following month. Sarah's mother was relieved. Marcus's parents were happy, and their friends were excited to hear that the work crisis had been resolved. That evening, as they sat together on the couch eating takeout pizza and watching a movie, Sarah realized that their marriage had already survived its biggest test. They had learned to love each other not despite their flaws and complications, but because of them. Marcus's job would always be dangerous, and their life together would always be more uncertain than most couples had to deal with, but they had also discovered that their love was strong enough to handle whatever challenges came their way. I have one more thing to tell you, Marcus said during a commercial break. Sarah felt her stomach tighten slightly. What now? Marcus smiled and pulled a small envelope out of his pocket. Plane tickets to Hawaii. I booked us a new honeymoon trip for next month when I'm definitely not going to be called away on any missions. Sarah looked at the tickets and started laughing. You're sure about that? Because I don't think I can handle another interruption to our romantic plans. I'm sure, Marcus said, pulling her closer to him. Rivera owes me a favor after making me miss our original honeymoon. She's personally guaranteeing that I'll be available for 2 full weeks of nothing but you, me, and that resort in Maui we've been dreaming about. Sarah settled against his shoulder and thought about how different their story was from the fairy tale wedding she had always imagined. Their marriage hadn't started with happily ever after. It had started with the hardest conversation 2 people could have and had grown stronger because they had survived it together. I love you, Mrs. Thompson, Marcus said quietly. I love you too, Mr. Secret Agent, Sarah replied, twisting his grandfather's ring around her finger. But next time you have something important to tell me, maybe wait until after the honeymoon. Marcus laughed and kissed the top of her head. Deal. Though I should probably mention that I also speak 6 languages fluently and I'm trained in hand-to-hand combat. Sarah sat up and looked at him with mock seriousness. Marcus Thompson, is there anything else about you that I should know? Well, he said with a grin, I also make an excellent lasagna, but I was saving that surprise for our first anniversary. Sarah shook her head and settled back against his shoulder, finally feeling like she was exactly where she belonged. Married to a man who was much more complicated and interesting than she had ever imagined, building a life that would be anything but ordinary. But that would be theirs. Marcus set down his coffee cup and looked at Sarah with uncertain eyes. I wasn't sure you'd still be here, he said quietly. I wasn't sure you'd want me to come home. Sarah reached up and touched his face, noticing a small scar near his left ear that hadn't been there on their wedding day. Where else would I be? This is our home. We're married. I know, but after everything that happened on our wedding night, after the way I left. Marcus's voice trailed off as he searched her face for signs of how she was feeling.